let's talk about how to show building materials, as that wall you want to draw could be made of brick, stone, or wood. How do you show these materials in your sketches? Adding a sense for the building materials can give us a lot of information about the architecture, and it adds visual interest and texture. I'll show you how to do this without having to draw in every brick or stone. In this lesson, I'll show you how the quality of your line will suggest the building material and scale, how showing material thicknesses gives your sketches a sense of reality, and how to quickly suggest building ornament and details. Let's start with line quality and what it can tell us about the building materials. So let's look at an image from an entry gate in Italy to the town of Civita di Bagnoregio. I did a sketch of this a couple of years ago, and I love this edge of the building, and how you draw that line will tell so much about the materials used here. So if I were to draw this line as one continuous, thick, heavy line, it's going to give me a really cartoony, flat sense of the materials. Instead, what I like to do is I like to let the quality of the line at the edge tell me something about the material. So I'm going to do small lines, light lines. I pick up my pencil a lot to let your mind's eye connect the lines. Don't even have to show them everywhere. And it starts to give a better sense of the material of this rustic stone. Let's take a look at that in the sketch. So starting up here to get that edge, I actually drew very little. It's a very light line, and I used the watercolor from the sky to define that edge. But down here, I show a little more of the character of the stone. I pick up my pencil a lot, I dig in a lot. Let me show you how I make those lines. So maybe for the top, I draw something very light because I know the watercolor is going to come in to define that edge. But down here, a little lower, I'm doing a line that is small, has small movements to reflect the scale of the stone. I'm picking up my pencil a lot. I draw light lines. I dig in certain places to indicate kind of the underside of a piece of stone or a shadow underneath a stone. So the quality of that line starts to tell me more about the building material. Now, let's imagine, what if I were to draw those lines a little differently? What if I were to make the marks bigger? Well, then it starts to read as much bigger stone. The scale is different. So the quality of the line tells us not only about the material, but about the scale of the material. What if I were to draw that line as something a little straighter? It would almost read like brick. What you don't want to do, though, is draw that as a flat, heavy, cartoony line, because that really just flattens out the whole sense of perspective. It flattens out the depth. It doesn't tell us anything about the quality of the material. So with this, you can see how the quality of the line that you make, especially at the edge of a building, can really tell you a lot about the materials the building is made from. Now let's look at what it looks like when you're looking at the face of a building. Not just the edge, but what happens across the face. Same town in Italy. And what you see here is, of course, at the edge, I've picked up my pencil a lot. I'm showing rough, loose edges to try and indicate the rustic stone. But across the face, I've only indicated some of the stone in certain places. For example, I've built up the little squares or circles to indicate the stone right around the entry, because that's a focal point in my sketch. And I kind of want to build up that line quality around that focal point and then let it sort of feather out to the edges. Another important spot is the edge of the building. So I show a different quality to stone. These are courses of stone at that edge there. And then I just show them just in little clusters and spots. Again, the scale is important. If I do a big circle or big oval, then it reads like big stone. If I make the strokes really small, then it's indicating the correct a scale of the material. The other thing I really want to show you about this is that I don't draw in every stone, or if it's brick, every brick. I just show it in places. And I keep a swath of white, of the white of my paper coming through. Even when I'm painting this, I'm picking up my paintbrush a lot, and I'm letting a lot of white come through. And that gives the sketch a sense of light coming across the face. It lightens up the whole sketch. The facade doesn't feel quite so heavy. Let me show you in another sketch that I did. This is in Holland, in The Hague, the Binnenhof. It's a sketch that I did this past summer. And the materials here are brick, but you see some of the same principles. So my brick edge is fairly straight. You know, brick makes a pretty straight edge at this scale. But across the facade, I went in and actually drew very thin lines very close together to indicate the brick. So let me show you how I would sketch that. So if this is the edge, I'm actually drawing just very thin lines. And I'm kind of feathering out the edges. And what's most important about brick is the horizontal coursing. So I'm showing it really as a lot of horizontal lines close together. And I don't have to draw it all the way across the facade. I only need to show it in a few places, especially at the edges. Then to get it to read a little bit more like brick, I can add a few verticals. Again, I put them in clusters, and I stagger them because usually brick joints are staggered. So that starts to indicate the brick material. Then again, I've left a swath of white all the way across the face of this building, and it just makes it feel so much lighter, feels like it's bathed in sunlight. It also saves me a lot of time because I don't have to draw in every brick or every course of brick. And I can selectively sort of pick what my focal point will be and then build up the line work in that area. So that's a good way to show the materials of either brick or stone on the facade of a building. So now let's go back to Amsterdam to talk about material thicknesses. It's really important to show the three-dimensionality of materials because it makes your sketches look and feel so much more realistic. As I look at this image, I'm noticing things like the underside of this roof is important to show. And even though it's hard to see in this photo, there's a fascia piece, a board that runs across the front that represents the thickness of the overhang of the roof. And then, as we talked about before, muntins and mullions, showing those as double lines and showing the depth of the window as it recedes into the wall. And even places like this, where you get a little bit of a thickness of the overhang over the doorway, some dimensionality here. So you want to build up the lines so that everything reads a little more realistically. Even that sign, if I'm going to sketch that sign, that round Heineken sign, I'm going to give it a little thickness underneath. Let me show you in the sketch. So this is a sketch that I did in Amsterdam as I sat and had a cool drink with my cousin, who sat very patiently while I sketched. And you'll notice things like, here's the roof edge up here, here's the underside. I indicate some of the detail on the underside. Things like this molding here. I mean, it's a loose sketch. It was a quick sketch. But again, there's the suggestion of thicknesses of materials. The depth of this piece here, multiple lines around the windows, those nice dark window panes where the mullion still reads. Then I put a layer of paint over it. And even this little sign, a circle with a little bit of an underside to it. Let me show you what I mean for that. So even that little sign has material thickness. So there's the sign. I would actually add a little bit of the underside. And it really helps to have that material read more realistically. Of course, that roof edge is going to have a thickness like this. Comes back in perspective. We want to read the underside. So those material thicknesses are really important. Let me show you one more thing about this sketch, and that has to do with the sense of the brick on the face of the building. So as we talked about before, I show lots of very thin, light, horizontal lines, horizontal going to the vanishing point, close together to indicate the courses, the horizontal courses of brick. And then I show small verticals so that we read kind of the dimensions of brick. So you see those here and here and here, the little verticals. And then the lines sort of fade out as they move away from the center of the drawing and the focal point of my drawing, which is this corner. And even the color starts to fade out a little bit. I did go back and paint over it and let the watercolor sink into here. And I show some variation in the color, and that also helps give that sense of brick a little bit of life. And even up above the window openings, I can show the sense of the brick there as well. So this was a good opportunity to show some material thicknesses, suggest some detail, and show the sense of brick, because the brick in Holland is absolutely amazing. The next image is at Island Wood on Bainbridge Island, Washington. And I'd like to show you a little bit more about the material thicknesses and how to show them in beams and columns here. All right, I'm going to start with kind of the shape of the space. There's my vertical edge, which is the line underneath those beams. Then a ground line kind of comes across. I will have measured the proportions with my pencil. And then those beams kind of come across. It's a little sharp like this, and they make a shape with that column, kind of like that. So there's the first big shape, and you notice how I use my triangle to speed things up. Next, my vanishing point. I measured it, and it looks to be maybe right in here, which would give my eye level line to be somewhere right about here. Now I can use that vanishing point to start that sketch. There's the back wall back there. And the wall comes forward here. And then I have the line of columns over here that go along that line. All right, let's try drawing in a beam. So here we have the top part of the beam coming across, extends past the roof, comes down here, has a little metal edging on it. Then it comes back in perspective here. And then like this. All right, so let's add a little thickness to this beam so that it reads like a proper material. So I'm adding another line just to the outside of this other one. Okay, so there's one. Then we have the column in between. Let's get that roof line in too. Like this. So the column hits right about here. So it's good to get some material thicknesses on that column. And then the base in perspective. So there's our column. Now on the other side of that column is the next beam. Comes here, I give it some thickness. There's a little spacing in between there, and I'm showing the underside for that beam. And then I would continue that process all the way down. Same for these wood members in the ceiling. I want to show the underside, going to the vanishing point, and then it pops up, it has some height. So I'm going to end up showing 3 lines for that area. So it's important to add a sense of materials and the thickness of materials to your sketches. Then I just can continue and add more information. I can even show that little bolt right there, which adds a lot as well. So material thicknesses are always important to show. And now let's look at this image from central Italy of a beautiful Renaissance doorway in an ancient wall. It's a simple view, but it's a perfect example for me to show you a lot of the things that we talked about in this lesson. I'm going to start with that line quality at the edge of the wall, and then we're going to add a sense of material, showing the proper scale for the stone. Then we're going to add thicknesses and dimensions to the little overhang over the doorway and recess the window and the door, and we'll add some texture and color at the end of the sketch. So let's get started. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, is block out the basic shapes, and the first edge that I see is going to happen right in here. So I'm going to lightly mark that in my sketch. It comes to about here, the wall hits the ground maybe right through here, it slopes down a little bit, and then I'm going to lightly block in where I see that door. Comes to about here. About here. That little overhang is going to be over here. And then the window is centered right above it. So we get the outside of the window, little base underneath it, the inside of the window there. And let's go ahead and sketch this doorway, the actual door, in a little bit. Needs to be a little wider. So while I'm starting the sketch and still drawing with light lines, it's really easy just to make corrections as I go. And I think I'm going to go ahead and sketch in a little bit of these stairs too. There's one, there's another one in here, another one's down here somewhere. Okay, so those are the basic shapes. Now let's see if we can figure out where my eye level and vanishing point are. There's not a lot of perspective in this straight-on view, but there are little places where we can find a little bit of perspective. So I'm going to look first at this step right here where that's angling back, and another one angling back here. The front comes across here. That is in perspective, and it's probably pretty close to where I'm going to find my eye level and vanishing point. So let's establish the vanishing point right about there, kind of in the center of the doorway, and draw in the eye level line here. Not a whole lot of perspective to work from, but there's a little bit, and what little there is, it's important. All right, now let's start with some lines. I'm going to first draw this line here, and as we looked at before, I'm going to vary the quality of that line. I'm going to try and hint at the scale of the stones, the size of the stones, and I'm picking up my pencil a lot and making that line really an expressive line. And that comes down to here. For the doorway, I'm going to pick up my straight edge so that it speeds things up a little bit. Let's start putting some of these shapes in. All right, now we're going to use a little bit of the perspective because inside this doorway, we need to show that it's recessed from the face of the wall. So it's going to come back like this, in here a little bit, and using the vanishing point here a little bit. Now we can barely see it in this photo, but we know it's there, and it's important to show that sense of depth in that doorway. So there we go with a little bit of depth. We could divide this in half, show the two parts of the door. We're also going to use that vanishing point for this little bit of an overhang up here. So up here there's a little angle. Up here there's a little angle, and you can see how using the triangle really helps me speed things up and make sure my lines are pretty accurate. Sometimes I use it, sometimes I don't. I usually reserve it for the beginning of the sketch when I'm making super quick lines. And then we're going to add some thicknesses to the stone up here. And there's a little more perspective there. So I want to make sure that that material, that stone, really reads properly. Now let's pop up to this window. We have a little underside here, a little shelf. There's a little overhang there too. And it goes back in perspective a little. Then let's get that window in. Here again, we're going to use the vanishing point to add a little depth. There's a little bit of molding there. Comes around and into there. And another little shelf up at the very top. I'm gonna make sure that has a sense of material thickness too. Now I can start to draw that window in a little bit. Let's add a little more architectural detail to this. Even that out a little. There's that joint there. Let's add a little bit of information to the doorway. These panels and the base. Proportions don't have to be perfect. It's a sketch, just needs to be close. And the panel at the top. And you'll notice I'm showing double lines for those, so those read as material thickness too. Okay, let's work a little bit on this landing and the stairs. There's a little piece there. Let's get this. There's a little bit of perspective to this first step too, and a thickness to the tread, the top of the stair. There's the riser. And we have this in perspective. There's a thickness to the top of this step. And some depth here. And then one more that comes out from the wall. The wall is down here. That also goes to the vanishing point. And it comes across straight. It's the vanishing point over here again. And it has a little bit of thickness. But this part slopes down. All right, now let's add some of the detail texture to the stones and also these pots. Same thing for the line quality. As we were using an expressive line here, we can also do that with the plants in these pots. So when the light is pretty flat in a view like this, I kind of make up a direction of light source, and usually my sun will come from this side. If I'm going to make it up, I make it optimal. So this light is coming from the upper left and going down to the lower right. So when I make this line, again, the texture says a lot about the material. And I'm picking up my pencil a lot. I want it to feel like that's a sun-drenched side to that plant. And this side can get darker. But again, the marks I make show the texture of the plant. Let's do the same thing to this side. I pick up my pencil a lot, even just put dots to show the side that's in sun. Gets a little heavier over here. Add a little texture to help it feel more natural. And there we have our potted plants. Now when I draw in the texture of the stone on the facade, I'm actually going to try and leave this diagonal swath pretty light, almost white. I'm going to try not to paint into that area too much. Let's take a look at how we can start to add some of that stone. So it needs to feel pretty random. This is old stone, and I'm just going to suggest it in places, like around the window and the door. I don't need to draw in every piece of stone. I just want to suggest it. I can even heavy up some of those lines just to give it a little more texture. And then here, there's a piece of an old archway through here, and then more stone through here. And when it's random, you make it really random. When it's got some order to it, like rows, you kind of suggest the rows. Again, the size is important. If I do really big marks, it won't read like this stone. The scale is important to the sketch, the size of the stone. And now I'll pick a little bit up down here. And again, I'm going to try and leave it pretty light through this area. Now let's add a little bit to the background. A little bit to the ground. It can be really helpful to use your vanishing point. Show a few lines in the ground so that our doorway and steps are actually sitting on something. Fill that corner. All right. Oh, One last thing, the little ring. All right, now let's add some color. So this first layer of paint establishes the base colors. I try to add a lot of variety to the color so that it changes from one spot to the next. I'm mixing grays and reds and yellows, letting them all mingle on the paper. Next, I'm going to let it dry, and then I'm going to add another layer of darker, denser paint to give it a sense of shadows and also some punch and some pop. Let's go to King Street Station in Seattle, Washington, where there is a crazy amount of detail to draw. Some people really love to show all that detail and really get into drawing it very carefully, but I'm probably a bit of an impatient sketcher, and so I like to simplify it and draw it really, really fast. Let me show you how I do that. So I still like to draw the big shapes in, the big architectural shapes. So I'm getting the sense of the beams and the ceiling, and I get those in first, get that ellipse, this ellipse. But then when it comes time to actually draw the detail, I use the mark that I make to suggest it. So let's take a look at how that works. Again, I tend to pick up my pencil a lot when showing detail. I make little digs in the paper to indicate the shadow. So you're just kind of mimicking the big shapes. And here, I simplify what I see just into some basic marks. And here, I kind of get the rhythm in, but really it's just simple squiggles. And a little punch in places to indicate some shadow. It's really quick and can be really effective in a sketch. And it's fun to do. For homework, I'd like you to find a doorway you like and suggest the materials, the quality and the scale of the materials, the wall, a sense for material thicknesses. Have fun with it and see how little you can draw and still suggest the actual building materials. Usually, less is more. In the next lesson, we'll look at how to incorporate sloping surfaces. This includes things like roofs and stairs. I think you'll be surprised to learn how these elements work in perspective.